Good morning. My name is Carolyn Klauba, and I'm the Stewardship Program Coordinator for the Sourlands Conservancy. Today we're at Pinelands Nursery, and we're going to be talking with Fran and Tom about Pinelands Nursery.
Hi, my name is Fran Chismar. I am the Sultan of Sales at Pinelands Nursery and also co-host of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast.
And I'm Tom Knezick, who I'm the production analyst at Pinelands Nursery and also the co-host of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast. Yeah, so Pinelands Nursery was founded by my parents, Don and Suzanne Knezick, in 1984. And they really started out growing blueberries, and then they got asked, they were selling to garden centers primarily. Then they got asked to grow grapes and currants. And I don't remember exactly what year, but at one point, the garden center chain they were selling to was purchased by a larger garden center chain. And so their sole customer completely changed overnight, and now instead of just servicing 15 or 20 garden centers in New Jersey, now they had garden centers in Long Island, in New York, in Delaware, all over the region. And it scared them a little bit. Now they had someone who's a different person signing their checks that were coming to them. Things were a little bit up in the air, and the demand was really, really high. But during that whole time, they were looking for other things to grow. They got involved with the native plant side in New Jersey, and some great people like Hubert Ling, Bob Swain, Bill Young, some of the bigger names in native plants in New Jersey. And they decided, hey, you know what? There's demand for some native plants due to some legislation like the Clean Water Act and the Pinelands Preservation Act. But there isn't the outlets to go and get these plants. So they kind of had the bright idea, said, hey, if we're the ones that are growing these plants, and they legally need to plant them, and we're the only ones that have them, then they kind of have to go to us. The whole time they had a passion for this. They were getting more involved with native plants, and they really took a leap of faith and started just growing a lot of native plants from wild collected areas. Because they were familiar with the pine barrens, they were able to go out and collect a lot of the native seeds. And because there was just growing demand, they saw their sales go up and up and up every year, and specifically with the restoration market. And that was where they were doing environmental restorations on certain areas. And now in 2021, we're probably, if we're not the largest 100% restoration-focused native plant nursery on the East Coast, we're one of the biggest. So yeah, it's grown quite a bit. What species do we grow is really the million-dollar question. It's really tricky for us to figure out because you'll see with a lot of these restorations, if it's a wetland restoration, it calls for a completely different species mix than an upland restoration. Same thing if it's a restoration in Maryland, you're going to have different species that are applicable than a restoration that's in New Jersey, than a restoration that's in Connecticut. So our main focus was to keep things semi-local or local. We wanted to collect stuff that was native to the Mid-Atlantic / Northeast. We wanted to be in that region. We didn't want to get stuff that was native out west or in the Midwest. Even though some of these plants are still native out there, we didn't want to have that plant palette. We wanted to make sure we were collecting things wild. And to do that, you're really collecting things that are native to this area that we're here in New Jersey. The next thing was, where was a lot of this demand coming from? With the Clean Water Act in particular, it required, and a lot of these acts, they really focus on wetlands. So if you look at our plant catalog, the majority of the species are wetland species or bordering wetland species. So these are things that are good for marshes, for bogs, for fens, swamps, and those riparian areas along streams and ponds. We sell a lot of plants that are good for salt marshes. So if you're going to the beach and you're going over the bridge onto the actual barrier island, if you look out to the left and right, the plants you see there are particular because they need to be, they only grow in salt water. There's not a lot of people who grow those plants, but we are one of them. So those are the main focuses. We want to have a local footprint, and we really focused primarily on the wetland species because that's where a lot of these restoration projects were going. A couple of years ago, we started to see there was a bigger focus, more with a lot of private projects where they want to create pollinator meadows, which tend to be upland meadows, and so they're on hills. And so we started growing plants that were more upland plants for these meadows. And since most of those projects were being done through seed, we started producing them as seed, and we'd harvest the seed and then sell just the seed instead of growing them into plants. So,
and we specialize in wetland projects, and also with a kind of a subspecialty in salt marsh projects, and it's mainly a coastal plain product mix, even though there is some Piedmont, but a large portion of New Jersey is coastal plain. And one thing that I think a lot of people identify with when you talk about New Jersey is the beach or the shore, the bay. So a lot of our projects, we do supply a lot of restoration projects, and a lot of the plant material that we sell, and actually our biggest seller is something, when you think of native plants, isn't the sexiest native plant you could think of. It's smooth cordgrass, which is the natural bay grass that you would find at any of the Jersey beaches. So it's that plant that's in the tidal zone, that's alternately wet, alternately dry. It's in that tide twice a day. And there's been years where we've supplied millions of these plants of one plant for restoration. And our beaches are a large part of our identity, and a lot of where everyone vacations and things like that. And it's constantly changing with climate change and sea level rise. It's something that constantly, with nor'easters and hurricanes, that has so many factors against it, that it's a constant restoration. And it's one thing that we've been doing for so many years. It was one of our specialties, and we identify very strongly. We also help organizations like New York City Parks. We were a large part of their million trees. 900,000 of those trees that they planted were reforestation. So we're really excited about that. For us, it's important. 95% of what we grow is from seed that we collect ourselves. So we have a team that constantly is going around and trying to get the correct provenance. And why provenance is important, it really connects with pollinators and with wildlife, so that plant is blooming at the time it's supposed to bloom, when pollinators are in that area, or wildlife has the food when they're supposed to have it. If you don't match those things up, you really want to connect the entire food web. It's not about just beautifying or having trees back. You need to make sure that it helps all the wildlife, the bird migration, the whole food web, and to consider yourself part of that food web, not just visually looking at it or owning it. It's being a part of it, and that's the best way to be a part of that. To make sure it's the right species for the right thing, we're actually working with an organization that just contacted us about a turtle bog. So you're really being cognizant of what, for that specific area, what that wildlife needs, what they need at that time of the year. So it's not just, hey, this area needs plants, it's eroding. You want to make sure it's the right plants to match up with the right soils, that it's performing the ecosystem functions that it's supposed to. If it's a floodplain, let's say a wooded area alongside of a stream, and during storms that floodplain floods, you need to make sure you have the right plant material that can take it when it's wet and take it when it's dry. Or a rain garden, where you're capturing that rain and it might be inundated for 3 days and then might be dry for the month of August. You need to make sure you're really capturing plants that can handle all those fluctuations, and also provide, you want to make sure, in a rain garden, you're capturing monarchs or pollinators, things like milkweed that are so important to monarchs. You want to make sure you're incorporating all these things, so that it's a complicated food web, that you're kind of covering all your bases.
Yeah, we always get the question, where can I get these plants? Pinelands Nursery is wholesale only. Luckily, native plants have become more popular, not just in New Jersey, but in the whole country. So there's growing numbers of nurseries that are carrying this stuff. My wife and I started a program called Pinelands Direct Native Plants, where we're actually just buying plants from Pinelands Nursery and then reselling them through a website. And where Pinelands Nursery has quantity minimums, you need to get 10 of this or 50 of that, we get rid of the quantity minimums because we're buying the whole flat and then we're splitting it up between our customers. But there's tons of other great nurseries in New Jersey. Wild Ridge Plants is up in the Sourlands. You have Toadshade native plants. I'm blanking a lot of the names of the other ones, but there's a bunch down the shore. I know Pat Sutton is a native plant advocate. She really pushes this other nursery, Goshen Gardens, that's down in southern New Jersey. But the best option, whether in New Jersey or whatever state, is reach out to your native plant society. A lot of them have great websites. Look on their website, and they'll usually have a list of where you can find native plants to your region. Whether it's nurseries, a lot of times they'll even have their own sales. I know the New Jersey Native Plant Society is having a plant sale that's going on right now in February and March for them. So that's a good outlet to get plants. And we've donated some, Toadshade's donated some, Wild Ridge has donated some, and a couple other nurseries all donated plants. And you can actually support the Native Plant Society and get native plants for your yard.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah, the biggest thing, if I really had to sum up my thoughts on all of this, was just get started. Reach out to your Native Plant Society. Go on Facebook. There's lots of great groups. If you just look up native plants on Facebook, there's lots of great groups for your area that can kind of help guide you into what to plant and really better customize what you want for your yard, because you have other people in your area that are doing this. But the big thing is you really have to get started. Our ecosystem is getting more and more fragmented by the day, and the best way to reconnect it is through your backyard. And if you start doing it, and now your neighbors start planting natives in their backyard, you've created a little ecosystem right there in your community that might connect the woods on either side. But if we don't do it, we're relying on ecosystem services at our parks, in our wild places, but our parks are turning more into soccer fields and baseball fields and less wild. And the wild places we have are just diminishing by the day because they're becoming housing developments and warehouses and all sorts of development, more impervious surface. We're losing those wild places. We can't rely on those ecosystem services that we need, the floodplains, the water retention, all of those kind of things. We can't rely on them coming from somewhere else anymore. We need to take control and actually do it in our backyards.
So basically, restoring our planet is a complicated process.
It's a very complicated process, and you wish there was one answer for all of it, but it takes a lot of processes and a lot of people. We're all part of that solution, and that solution only happens when that circle gets bigger and more people care and more people get involved. So it may feel like only one or two native plants on your property. What is that going to do in the long run? But it's the connectivity. Our forests and our wildlife is so fragmented by human hands that we need to slowly put it back together so we can all play a part, even just with a few plants, to make that seamless again.